I used to think luxury was about excess, about gold edges and heavy doors, and people being impressed before they even touched the product. And that misunderstanding is exactly why the Chanel story matters, because Coco Chanel did not build modern luxury by adding more. She built it by stripping things away until only truth was left. Chanel was born into poverty, abandoned in an orphanage, raised by nuns, who dressed her in black and white out of necessity, not style. And that origin is not a footnote, it is the foundation. When you start with nothing, you learn quickly that decoration is a lie, if it hides discomfort, and Chanel carried that lesson into a world drowning in corsets, feathers, and social performance, masquerading as elegance. At the turn of the 20th century, luxury for women was a prison dressed up as privilege. Heavy fabrics, rigid silhouettes, impossible routines, all designed to signal status rather than serve the person wearing them. Fashion was not built for women who moved, worked, or breathed freely. Chanel saw this not as tradition, but as insult. She wasn't trying to be rebellious. She was trying to be comfortable. And comfort in a society addicted to spectacle looked radical. That is where modern luxury begins, not in aspiration, but in refusal. Chanel didn't enter fashion through elite schools or aristocratic patronage. She entered it through observation and necessity. She watched how men dressed and noticed something revolutionary, hiding in plain sight: freedom of movement. Jerseys, trousers, simple lines, clothes designed for function. While others saw masculinity, she saw logic. While others saw rules, she saw inefficiency. Chanel didn't ask permission to borrow from menswear. She took what worked and ignored the outrage. That act alone redefined luxury from display to experience. Wearing Chanel wasn't about being looked at. It was about how it felt to exist inside your own body. The little black dress is often treated as a design icon, but its real power was philosophical. Black was the color of servants' widows and mourning. Chanel turned it into elegance by refusing to accept that value had to shout. Simplicity became status. Restraint became power. This was not minimalism as trend, but minimalism as rebellion. In a world where wealth was loud, Chanel made silence expensive. That shift rewired luxury permanently. And then there was perfume. Chanel No. 5 did not smell like flowers because Chanel didn't want women to smell like gardens. She wanted them to smell like women. Synthetic aldehydes were controversial, unnatural, almost offensive to traditional perfumery. But Chanel understood something others didn't. Modernity itself had a scent. Industrialization, speed, abstraction, all demanded a fragrance that wasn't trying to imitate nature, but to transcend it. No. 5 wasn't a perfume you recognized. It was one you remembered. That distinction matters. Luxury Chanel understood lives in memory, not novelty. What made Chanel dangerous to the establishment wasn't taste. It was independence. She built a business around herself in a time when women were expected to be muses, not makers. She controlled her brand, her image, her distribution. She refused to license her name carelessly. Long before brand equity became a term, Chanel treated identity as something sacred. This is where many luxury houses later learned from her, even if they never admitted it. Modern luxury is not just about product excellence. It is about narrative discipline. But Chanel's rise was not clean or heroic in the way stories are often told. She was difficult controlling and deeply shaped by her time's prejudices and contradictions. She aligned with power when it suited her. She burned bridges. She demanded loyalty and returned it selectively. This is uncomfortable, but it is honest. Builders who change culture are rarely gentle. They are focused, and focus often cuts. Chanel didn't want approval. She wanted permanence. The irony is that she achieved it by constantly rejecting what luxury had been before her. She closed her house during World War II rather than compromise. She walked away when the world no longer fit her standards. And then years later, she returned older, dismissed, called irrelevant by critics who thought the future belonged to excess again. They were wrong. Chanel came back with the same principles she always had: simplicity, function, clarity. And once again, the world followed. What Chanel ultimately defined was not a look, but a standard. Luxury became less about owning the most and more about needing less. About knowing who you are so clearly that nothing extra is required. That idea is now so embedded in modern luxury that it feels obvious, but it was revolutionary when Chanel lived it. Every clean line, every restrained palette, every brand today that talks about timelessness is borrowing from a woman who learned early that time only respects what is essential. And this is where the story deepens, because defining modern luxury came at a cost that is rarely discussed. A cost paid in solitude, control, and the burden of becoming larger than the self. And as Chanel's influence expanded beyond clothing into culture itself, the question shifted from how she built luxury to what luxury took from her, and what happens when a brand becomes immortal while the human behind it remains painfully finite, and the journey moves forward without pause into the next phase, where legacy, contradiction, and consequence collide, and the sentence continues into what follows, where legacy becomes heavier than creation. Because once Chanel succeeded in defining modern luxury, she no longer had the freedom to simply be a designer. She had become a symbol, and symbols are not allowed to evolve without resistance. The world wanted Chanel frozen in time, preserved as an idea rather than allowed to remain a person. And this tension followed her until the end. Every decision was no longer judged on whether it worked, but on whether it matched the myth others had constructed around her. This is the hidden tax of influence. When you shape culture eventually tries to own you back. Chanel lived long enough to watch her principles be misunderstood, diluted, and imitated without comprehension. Simplicity became a costume. Minimalism became a marketing angle. What was once a rebellion against excess slowly turned into a uniform for those who wanted to look effortless without earning it. This is the quiet tragedy of success at scale. When an idea becomes universal, its original meaning is often the first casualty. Chanel understood this, and it made her sharper, more defensive, more uncompromising with age. She wasn't clinging to the past. She was protecting the essence. Her return to fashion in her 70s is one of the most revealing chapters. Critics mocked her. They called her outdated, disconnected, irrelevant, in a world obsessed with novelty. But Chanel did not chase trends. She repeated herself deliberately, because repetition, when rooted in truth, becomes authority. She brought back clean lines, restrained palettes, and functional elegance, not to prove she could change, but to prove she didn't need to. Within a season, the same critics who dismissed her were copying her again. That moment crystallized her philosophy. Modern luxury is not about being new. It is about being right long enough for the world to catch up. What Chanel took from her success is rarely discussed. She paid with intimacy, with softness, with the ability to disappear. Control became her shield, because without it, her work would be misused. She trusted few, delegated reluctantly, and carried the burden of her brand personally. This made her difficult, but it also made her durable. Luxury at that level does not survive on collaboration alone. It survives on coherence. And coherence demands a singular will, even when that will isolates the person behind it. After her death, Chanel the woman ended, But Chanel, the standard, did not. The brand lived on because the principles were clear enough to be interpreted without being erased. That is the ultimate test of modern luxury. Not whether it sells, but whether it can outlive its creator without losing its spine. Many brands grow. Few endure. Chanel endured because it was built on an idea stronger than any individual product, that true luxury is restraint, clarity, and self-possession in a noisy world. Today, when luxury brands talk about timelessness, authenticity, and identity, they are speaking a language Chanel invented through action, not theory. She proved that luxury could be quiet and still dominate, that power could be expressed through subtraction, and that independence was the most expensive material of all. She didn't democratize luxury. She redefined who it was for not those who wanted to be seen, but those who wanted to be certain of themselves. If there is a lesson here for anyone building something meant to last, it is this: trends expire, but principles compound. Chanel did not chase the future. She clarified the present so completely that the future had no choice but to follow. That is why her influence feels modern even now. She wasn't ahead of her time. She was aligned with something deeper than time. And if this story of how luxury was redefined through discipline rather than excess made you see brands' identity or ambition differently, then stay with this channel. Subscribe, because this is where we strip away the gloss and talk about what really builds enduring influence. And leave a comment sharing what Chanel's journey made you reflect on, because understanding luxury is ultimately about understanding yourself and what you choose to remove, not add in the process of becoming something that lasts.